Well, hey, y'all. Welcome to the When We Walk podcast, where this is a podcast where we discuss the questions we all ask as we walk through life. Let's chat.
So, it's been a little while since season 1 ended. Mm-hmm. What is new in our life as we enter into season 2?
Yeah,
There's something new in your life.
There's something new. I made sourdough bread for the first time ever.
You were on the sourdough.
I think this might be the first time I've ever made bread, period.
Yeah, probably.
Because there's other type. Yeah. I mean, I made pizza dough. We went through a pizza dough season.
Yeah.
That feels easy. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I've ever made bread.
Yeah. You've done really well. You had 2 weekends of just total
because I failed
bombs.
2 times.
Yeah, but the fact that you persevered.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I made actual artisan, like a really pretty loaf that you buy at like a bakery. Mm-hmm. And then I made just like sliced bread type loaves.
Yeah. And like dinner roll type things.
Well, they look like dinner rolls, but they're supposed to be like Hawaiian rolls.
Yeah.
Like the King's Hawaiian rolls, because our kids will pound those.
Yeah.
And I did not want to have to keep buying them.
Sure. And Hutch did say yesterday, after making his sandwich with one of those, best sandwich I've had in a long time.
Come on.
Yeah.
Oh, worth all the work.
Yeah. And we made Cheez-Its.
Yes.
And
there's all the discard recipes. See, everyone who's listening will know, or watching, they'll know, because most people have already been on this journey.
Yeah.
They did it back in the pandemic when they had all the time. And here I am trying to do it as our busy lives. But yeah, so
you did great.
Discard recipes, which are way easier. Mm-hmm. But bread, I'm pretty proud of those loaves.
Yeah. They look really pretty.
I don't know if it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, but
you did well to push through. So here's my honest take on sourdough.
Okay. So, I already know.
Yeah, you know. But you don't know this part. If I were, I love breakfast at restaurants. Mm-hmm. And when they say what bread option do you want with your meal? If they gave me biscuit, English muffin, whole wheat toast, sourdough, that's the order. That to me is the order. I would rather have
always
biscuit,
choose a biscuit, yes.
Then maybe English muffin, then whole wheat, and then sourdough.
So whole wheat before sourdough?
Yeah. And so it's way down the list for me, generally speaking. Okay. But the other aspect about me is I'm highly adaptable.
Yes, you are.
And so since sourdough has become a thing, I've just decided I guess I'll just enjoy it. And I really do like it.
It's just better for you. It's better. Easier on your gut.
I mean, yeah. So they say. And I think, bread is meant to be a vehicle for good butter or good jelly or jam or something like that. Yeah. And sourdough with all the holes, it doesn't hold it as well.
It doesn't.
So there's just some things about it that are probably not my first choice, but your loaves were really good.
And the sandwich loaves were good.
The sandwich loaves were unbelievable.
Because it was sweet with a little bit of honey. So it doesn't even really taste like sourdough. So
new addition to our lives. We have a lot.
I can put that on my Instagram bio / that I am a sourdough.
You're a sourdough maker.
I did say on Instagram, don't worry, I will not become a sourdough account. I do not have those skills yet.
You don't have to teach everybody, but I do hope you keep making it.
I know. We'll see how that goes.
It's great.
Yeah.
So with that, sourdough maker.
Becoming my identity.
Yes. I think that's a great question to talk about today is issues of identity. Where does our identity come from? How would we even define what identity is? Yeah. I think without necessarily using that word, though that word is very much thrown around in our culture today, I think issues related to identity are everywhere. They're extremely pervasive culturally, but also very personally in the way that we interact with the world around us.
I mean, you're just basically trying to discover, who am I? Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I think we equate that question to our childhood or maybe our 20s. Mm-hmm. But now that we've lived a little bit more life, we realize I don't think that question ever ends. Mm-hmm. Right?
No,
I think we are always asking that question. Who am I? What is my identity? How am I perceived by the world around me? What labels do I have? What do I offer the world? I think in every season of life, you're asking that question.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we think of it as connected to our youth, maybe, because like that's where we're like, especially watching our kids right now, right? They are trying to find who they are, and they're maybe connecting their identity to what they do, right? Their sports that they play, or I don't know, Laylee has Instagram now, and so it's what is she projecting to the world in there, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the question that never ends to me.
Always. Yeah, it's always there. Even recently, in one of my counseling sessions, my therapist said, I was explaining a scenario to him that was kind of bothering me, and I won't go that personal here. But a scenario that was bothering me, and he asked me the question I'd never considered before. How old did you feel when that happened? And I was like, well, no, I don't even understand how to answer that. And he was asked, so like, what age did you feel in relation to the situation in that moment?
Yeah.
And when I told him the age, he was like, okay, so what happened at that age in your life? And I'd never gone there before in my processing of emotions and thoughts and things like that. And so again, that's an issue of identity, like how we feel in a particular moment, how we view ourselves. The way that I like to define identity is kind of a Genesis 1 type thing, where Genesis 1 and 2 really, where we see that God made Adam and Eve, and then they had a relationship with God. They had a relationship with one another, and they had a relationship with the world around them.
Right.
So God, others, and you could say work or meaningful purpose. That how we view ourselves in relation to that triad really makes up our identity.
Okay. Yeah.
That's one way to think about it.
Well, and it's interesting even to think back to what your counselor asked you, because those things, like, they do shape who we become, what we believe about ourselves, and then what we want to be out into the world. And so either in a negative way or a positive way, right? Like we will say, I do not want to be that person, and I'm going to move a whole nother way. But I think that's interesting that he asked you that.
Yeah. Yeah. So in that case, it would be like how I viewed myself in relation to the people that I was interacting with and the context, kind of the world I was operating in. How old did that make you feel?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
So identity comes with all kinds of labels, right?
Right.
Like we just kind of all allow labels to stick to us as we go through life. Obviously the big ones now, gender and sexuality culturally, but also job, hobbies, faith, like sourdough maker.
Right. The things you do, the things you like, the things you, it can be as, what is it, like surface level as we want it to be, because that's what we want people to see us as. But then also our deeper convictions that eventually come out, I think, that we, with other circles, we may start letting out, or in different seasons comes out. But I do think there are things, I wonder if there's more of this, like, there's this like internal piece of us that who we want to be, and then we try to like put those things in place to be seen that way. But then there's also labels that we absorb because of other people or expectations, depending on how we walk through life, the circles that we are in, or places we go. So it just gets complicated, I think, for people. I think it's even worse now because of social media for kids, young adults.
That's so true. Yeah.
I think that shapes you even more because of what you're seeing around. And then you start to rethink identity probably all the time. Yeah. And I think it's more of an internal, external wrestle based off what people believe of you or what you want to project. But then maybe even like the core internal kind of wrestling you have. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think there are aspects of how our identity develops that are healthy, and there are aspects that are unhealthy. I mean, as with anything in life, I don't think it's, as Christians, we would all say, like, our identity needs to be grounded in our relationship to God first and foremost. which I agree with. But we can go so far down that road that we feel like we can't really have anything in our lives that doesn't have this explicit connection to God in a sense of, and I think it's okay to say like, you're a plant mom. Right? Don't you have like a plant mom shirt?
I do.
So like that's
true. It's like a label you are
but it's just like I'm into plants. I enjoy plants. Like you don't find like your meaning and your purpose, but like that's one aspect of who you are. But it's an aspect of
who you are. Yeah.
So I heard about this little thing that people are doing. I don't know where this is happening, but a guy that I follow on Instagram lives in New York City and did a gathering with a group of people. It's called Dinner with Strangers.
Okay.
DWS. And it's like a thing. DWS. Dinner with Strangers. And someone invites like 10 people to their home who do not know each other. So everyone there is a complete stranger except for the one who invited them knows who all they are.
The person who invited them knows everyone.
Knows everybody.
Okay, good. That would be weird.
And they host the meal and set up the conversation and all of that, but all the people don't know each other. And the one rule is you cannot talk about what you do for a living.
Wow, that would be so hard.
Right, because when you're with people you don't yet know, what do you do? Like, what do you lead with?
Well, you ask, what do you do?
What do you do?
Where do you work?
Yeah.
Like, yes.
And so he was just kind of commenting on his post about what a fascinating night it was and the way that the direction conversation went, because usually, obviously, when you're with people you don't know, that's the common ground. It's like, well, what do you do? And you listen, and what do you do? And everybody tells a little bit. And then you feel like you've got some connection points you can talk about. So you really had to talk about, not that what you do should never be associated with your identity, but we'd probably find more meaning, purpose, value. It probably orients our life more than it needs to.
Yeah.
And I think as followers of Jesus, hopefully we can get to a point where we could say our life is first and foremost oriented around the defining in our life, our relationship with God and who he says we are.
But it's interesting when you talk about that triad that was kind of created in the beginning, right before the fall, like if that's God's design and it's this, our relationship with God defines us or we identify there, but then also our relationships like together, to others, right? To others, the people around you. And then your purpose or your connection to the world, right? What you do, what you produce, how you work.
Because he gave them meaningful work to do.
Right, he did. So, and that was before the fall. So there is these elements now that I'm thinking about it. And it's like, we always talk about it in the church, maybe first, like you're saying, first and foremost, find your identity in Jesus or in God. But then there is purpose in your identity with relationships, right? So like, I want to be identified as Micah's wife, right? Like that's part of, but it's part of how I have been shaped in this life now for now 20 years. Yep. So it has become a part of my identity, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually part of, now that you're saying it that way, it's like that's part of God's design. Now there are relationships now, because we live in a fallen world, that we connect with that are probably damaging or dangerous to our identity. And so there is this maybe connection that's beautiful on that side that we want to, it's not a bad thing to have that identity connected to people or having maybe even their input into our lives, right?
Yeah.
But then also your purpose in your work, there's got to, what I'm trying to get to is there's got to be this like balance with that too, right? Yes, God as part of our identity, obviously anchored in that because he's unchanging. And because we live in a fallen world, people and our purpose and our relationship with the world will get messy, right? But there is something redemptive in in both of those other parts of that triad is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
That I think are good for our identity. And so how do we uncover that?
Yeah.
I think that's more the question, right?
Yeah. And I think that really comes down to that every aspect of our identity, or you could say maybe even some of the details connected to our truest identity, and most consistent identity is that we are, first and foremost, every human being made in the image of God. I mean, that sets us apart from every other living thing on the planet, is that we're made in the image of God. And we could say a lot about all the implications of that.
What that means,
for all kinds of things, how we work, how we relate, how we manage our lives, gender, sexuality. I mean, there's so much to just being made in the image of God. And then for those who have given their life to Jesus, then we become children of God. So you're not born a child of God, in my opinion. You're actually just a beloved creation of God, a uniquely loved creation.
You become adopted in.
Yeah, you become adopted
after
in
you
once you say yes to Jesus.
You believe, and then
so
confess.
then your identity is even more deeply formed into I'm a son or I'm a daughter of
You
the king.
you become a part of a family.
Yep.
Which we know in this world, like family, name, there's a lot that comes with family.
Yep.
So there's that. So you are identified, like our kids are Eldridge kids. And there's a lot that comes with that because they know their family and they've learned their history and who, two families that have come together, but still.
So then I think once those things are in place, our understanding of those things become formed inside of us, the image of God, son or daughter of the living God through faith in Jesus, then everything else should orient in relationship to that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. When you go back to the image of God, I always think too, it's probably the most helpful to make sure we know who God is, right? Yep. Like we can't identify as his children unless we know him.
Right.
And so the first place you should go with your question of identity is like, I've got to know who he is. I've got to study his word. I've got to be in his presence, right? Our kids wouldn't understand what it means to be an Eldridge if they didn't spend time with us and we didn't give them like, hey, this is who we are in the world, right? Like we say please and thank you. We say yes, ma'am. That's a thing in our household. Not everyone does that, but we, so you've got to spend time with him.
You do.
To know who he is.
Yeah. I remember.
You're going to be an image bearer.
Yep.
Right?
Early in my 20s, I was discipled by a guy, and I was talking about just kind of my own personal like insecurities and struggles. And then I would also talk about my dad. And he made the connection. He asked me one time, "Are you kind of ashamed of your father?" My dad, Dad was out of work a lot. Dad wasn't as spiritual as I wanted him to be. He wasn't as engaged with me. He said, "Are you proud of your dad?" And I was like, "I don't know. Maybe not super. Maybe, in some ways not, a little bit embarrassed." I was young in my 20s.
Right,
you have this expectation. And he said, if you carry shame about who your dad is, you'll probably always carry shame about who you are.
Oh, wow.
And that was powerful. Like this huge insight to me because deep down, you came from him. And it took me some maturing to really value and recognize who my dad is and was and all that he brought into our family, which actually shaped me in the way that I carried myself and the way that I interacted with the world. So the same is true spiritually, like what you're saying, like if we've got to know God in order to fully benefit, I should say, from all of what it means to be his son or his daughter.
Yeah.
And so then I think everything else is oriented around that, right? Like that's the most true and consistent aspect of who we are.
Right.
Everything else is either not true or it's temporary to some degree. Okay. Right? So like our marriage is temporary. Hopefully in this life, not it's forever. But I don't know what it's going to look like on the other side.
Right.
I think like your job, it's okay to take pride in your job, to find value, to find some worth in your job. But what happens if you get fired?
Yeah.
What happens if your company sells and you get let go? If all of your identity, it's not, if your job is not oriented towards your relationship with God and your identity in him, then when that gets taken from you or when you lose that, then you lose your identity and then you're completely lost.
That's so true.
And so having our identity anchored in image of God, son or daughter of God, to me, it's the consistent and most true aspect of who we are, through which every other part of who we are finds its meaning.
Yeah.
Right?
I think so. I think that's helpful to kind of think of it that way. But I do think there is still, it's just, gosh, it's a hard balance in every season to not find not that it's a bad thing, but like okay, so there was that season of me being a young mom,
yes,
or a mom with little kids, young mom, at home. And there was like I don't even know how to put it. Like this was obviously before social media got super popular, but kind of a thing about being a stay-at-home mom. Like either people were like appalled by it, like I would never do that, or you fully embraced it and you wanted to do this your whole life. And I remember not even being able to identify in either camp. Like I'm just like, well, this is just what my life is. Like I'm just doing it. But I think it's okay to kind of walk in a season and go, but this is part of what I'm doing right now. So what does God think about it? How do I find where he is in it, what he thinks about me in it? I don't have to find my identity in it, but it is my season of life. It is my label, yes, I stay at home with my young kids. But I think I struggled with that in that season of like, I don't want to be identified that way, but I'm also like learning, I want to embrace it. So I want to embrace that part of who I am. So I am having to go back to, God, what do you say about the season of my life for who I am and what you've given to me or called me to in this season? And so it's this like tension of always going to God every season of whatever it is you're doing or the relationships you have. So going back to your little triad of like, I think you always do have to bring that back. Like, are these relationships, which in certain phases, like let's say our young kids, are these relationships I'm around helping point me back to who I am in Jesus, who I am in Christ? Or are the things I'm doing in my life, the purpose I'm holding, how do you view that, God? And maybe that kind of reframes somewhat of our identity, right? I don't know.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's holding it all in relation to your relationship to God. Even going back to the Genesis thing, like the relationship that Adam and Eve had with the land was defined by God. The relationship that they had with one another was defined by God. So really, it was their relationship with God that then gave direction and meaning to the other relationships, which then all in totality, I think, kind of forms your identity.
Yeah.
And so I think being able to carry the different things that are a part of our lives with the appropriate weight, with where they fit, where you don't find your ultimate meaning and purpose in those things. Because I think there's two dangers there. One is what happens when that's no longer who you are. You lose it, or it ends, and then you're completely lost. And that's where you see kind of for men, it's the midlife crisis. Right. It's like you get to this point in life where you found your value and you found your meaning, you found your identity, in your family that you were raising or the job that you had or whatever. And then you wake up one day and you realize this is actually either not what I want or it's not fulfilling enough. And so you try to remake yourself. And in so doing, you can often wreak havoc to many people. So either you kind of lose it or you find your identity in it and it's false. It's not true. It's not actually, so the easiest example to me is like celebrityism, right? Like it's like we make gods out of people who make movies and play sports. Like think how crazy that is.
I know.
Like they carry more political weight. They carry more social capital because they make movies and play sports.
I know.
And we have made gods out of them. And if you look at what happens to many of them, because they find their identity in these things, and we've given them this place in society, that when those things are taken away from them or they lose them, their whole lives just tank.
Yes, it's so true. Yeah. So what do you do? I think about like going back to, let's just say when you're forming and you're trying to figure this out, like more in your 20s, but then as it evolves over time, like how do you fight first the labels of the world around you, but then also stay true to like, this is who I think God's called me to be. I think one thing, as you were talking, I thought about this, like instead of saying I am this or whatever, like in this season of my life, God's allowed me to work at this place, or he has given me these friendships, or like kind of seeing it maybe more seasonally.
Yeah.
And I think that helps understand like this isn't who I will always be, or maybe, it's not who I am per se, but in this season, God has allowed me to work, as a maker or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. See things as kind of seasonal and temporary. I think also what you said is helpful too. God has either allowed me, God has given me, seeing it in relationship to your relationship with God, like understanding that these are things that he's given us to steward. And many of them are good things.
Yeah.
And it's okay to find fulfillment in those things. It's okay to find a level of purpose and meaning in those things. But understanding, again, I think they live in a healthier place in our lives when they're found in relationship with God. I mean, think about the number of moms. I don't know if this happens quite as often with dads, but like moms who find literally their identity in being their child's
parent.
And
caregiver,
the meter of their needs.
Yeah.
And then their child grows into adulthood and they're lost.
Yes.
But if you can see that, that's still going to be, even for a healthy, godly family, there's still going to be a tension there. There's still going to be loss. There's still going to be grief. But when that is seen in relationship to, this is something God has given me to do for a season.
Yes.
And then it'll look different in a different season. There's a grace that comes with that.
Right.
That doesn't eliminate the grief and all of that stuff, but it does give us what we need to kind of move on into the next season.
Yeah, I think that's good. Man, this is a topic I think that we have to think about as believers. We think it's only in our teens and 20s. Turns out it is every season of life.
Yes, and the world wants to slap labels on you.
Yes.
And labels feel good. They just do. Like if especially if they're labels that are applauded by the world.
Yep.
It's easy to say, I want to wear that badge. I want to carry that label.
But then the pressure that comes with to keep it up, or maybe you realize, or when it does fail you or fall apart, it's just so dangerous. Yep. You've got to go back to who I am in the Lord, being an image bearer of God, who he is, and then who he has called me to be in his kingdom in this world. So.
So maybe a question for listeners
okay.
As we wrap things up, because this is a podcast about the questions we encounter as we walk through life, is, how would you define yourself? What is your identity rooted in right now?
Yeah.
What's on your bio?
Honest.
Yeah. What's on your bio? Like start there. I think another great place to start is actually to ask people around you.
Yeah, that's good.
How would you describe me? And like, not my personality traits, but what kind of labels do you feel like I carry? What are the ones you feel like I carry with a little bit more pride and a little bit more like ownership? Or what are the ones that I carry that are actually like debilitating to me, that are actually not true about God's heart for me?
Right.
And how he sees me, that are actually weighing me down and binding me up in some ways.
And then how can you take all of it before the Lord and say, okay, God, what do you say?
Reorient.
Yeah. Reorient that question of who do you say that I am in this season? What do you want me to carry? Who am I? And let's start there before you.
Yep. And then getting to know, like you said, getting to know the Father will do the most for really forming your truest and most lasting identity.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Cool.
Well, hopefully that was helpful for everyone, and we'll see y'all next week.
See ya.